Gordon Brown announces he'll step aside as the race to replace him as Prime Minister hots up. It's been an extraordinary day at Westminster of frantic meetings, of offers and counter-offers to the Liberal Democrats. First, this afternoon, Gordon Brown's dramatic resignation announcement.
I have no desire to stay in my position longer than is needed to ensure the path to economic growth is assured and the process of political reform we have agreed moves forward quickly.
Within 2 hours, the Conservatives were making a new, improved bid.
We will offer to the Liberal Democrats in a coalition government the holding of a referendum on the alternative vote system.
And more drama with meetings continuing into this evening. Our political editor Michael Crick is at Westminster.
Talks broke up at the Commons tonight a short while ago after a dramatic and exciting day. And we still have no idea who will form our next government.
And here, a reaction from Labour's Deputy Leader Harriet Harman, who's just come from those negotiations with the Liberal Democrat team. And we'll also be joined by a key member of the Shadow Cabinet, Michael Gove. The markets have been watching every move. Our economics editor, Paul Mason, is here. And we also speak to the French Finance Minister after a massive European bailout. And with Brown soon to be gone, who might succeed him as Labour leader? The newspaper columnist Andrew Rawnsley and Steve Richards look back at the political journey and the legacy of a Prime Minister as clever as he was taciturn. Good evening. At the end of a day of frantic political manoeuvring and the announcement by Gordon Brown of the end of his prime ministerial career, not a moment too soon for his political detractors. The pace and direction of the negotiations to secure a deal for government appear to be moving all the time. After Gordon Brown announced Labour was to begin formal negotiations with the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives upped the ante, promising a referendum on a change in the electoral system. Lib Dem MPs are currently meeting to consider their options. Our political editor, Michael Crick, reports on the latest political gambles.
At 5 o'clock tonight came the news which may soon lead to the unblocking of this political crisis. Gordon Brown stepped out into Downing Street to announce that Labour was now in formal discussions with the Liberal Democrats to try and form a government. But then he revealed the dramatic twist that had led to those coalition talks starting.
I would, however, like to say something also about my own position. If it becomes clear that the national interest, which is stable and principled government, can be best served by forming a coalition between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, then I believe I should discharge that duty to form that government, which would, in my view, command a majority in the House of Commons in the Queen's speech and any other confidence votes. But I have no desire to stay in my position longer than is needed to ensure the path to economic growth is assured and the process of political reform we have agreed moves forward quickly. The reason that we have a hung parliament is that no single party and no single leader was able to win the full support of the country. As leader of my party, I must accept that that is a judgment on me. I therefore intend to ask the Labour parties to set in train the processes needed for its own leadership election. I would hope that it would be completed in time for the new leader to be in post by the time of the Labour Party conference. I will play no part in that contest. I will back no individual candidate.
So, dramatic news there. Gordon Brown resigning as leader of the Labour Party in order to help bring about a coalition government between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats. How will the rest of politics react to that? How things had changed. This morning, when the Conservative negotiating team emerged from their latest talks at the Cabinet Office with the Liberal Democrats, it was all smiles. The Conservatives and Lib Dems seemed to be closing in on a historic deal.
And the negotiating teams are working really well together.
Thank you very much. Come back here.
Good further progress has been made, and I'm now going to go and report on that to Nick Clegg and
parliamentary colleagues. Thank you very much.
But behind the scenes, we later learned, Nick Clegg was also holding a secret meeting with Gordon Brown, which may explain why the Lib Dem team was being so tight-lipped.
I don't think I've ever seen three politicians so silent.
Any news on electoral reform?
Not since IDS. So now the Liberal Democrat team have to go off and meet their MPs and also, later on, the party federal executive.
Their first meeting with Lib Dem MPs took place in the Commons Grand Committee room off Westminster Hall at lunchtime. Reporters gathered expecting a Lib Dem Conservative deal might be announced within hours. But when David Laws emerged, it was clear there were still problems.
Although we are very, very conscious of the need to make these decisions quickly, and that was a clear decision of the parliamentary party today, we also want to make sure that we get these matters right.
Liberal Democrat MPs have now been briefed by their negotiators. They've told the negotiators to go back and seek clarification from the Tories on a number of issues. But it's not really clear how much progress has been made so far and whether the Liberal Democrats have really been offered anything substantial on that tricky issue of proportional representation. Do you think you'll get what you want from this deal with the Conservatives on PR?
I don't know what the eventual outcome will be. You've seen the statement and we'll just judge it sensibly, constructively, every step of the way, as we always do.
Happy with the way things are going? How important is PR to all of this?
I think it's important, but it's not something to die in the ditch over at this stage. I think we can get something out of this.
On PR?
On moving the voting along in a different way, on AV or something like that. I think that's a possibility.
Do you think most MPs would be happy with that?
I hope so.
On AV?
I would. Well, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you very much.
How prescient those words would later prove to be, for Gordon Brown's late afternoon statement meant it was now game on.
It's just after 5:10 and it's very difficult to know where to go next, or indeed where this story goes next. Gordon Brown's dramatic intervention certainly changes things. For the last 2 or 3 days we've all been assuming it's about a deal between the Conservatives and the Lib Dems. But now there does seriously seem to be the possibility, the alternative possibility, of a deal between Labour and the Lib Dems.
And when Nick Clegg made his statement soon after, it was clear the Lib Dems were conducting a bidding war between two buyers fighting desperately for the same house.
We think it's the right thing, the responsible thing, to now open talks on exactly the same basis as we've been having with the Conservative Party, with the Labour Party, whilst of course continuing our discussions with the Conservatives. Gordon Brown has made an important announcement today. It must have been a very difficult thing for him to say personally, but I think he's taken it in the national interest, and I think his announcement could be an important element in the smooth transition towards a stable government that people deserve.
So when David Cameron met his MPs in the Commons at 6 o'clock, he knew he had to improve his offer to the Lib Dems. And to the dismay of many backbenchers who remained quiet, he did so.
What it appears is that the Conservatives are willing to offer the Liberal Democrats a referendum on the alternative voting system. That's not the same as proportional representation, but it would mean, in some people's eyes, a slightly fairer distribution of seats. And of course it's what Gordon Brown was offering before the election.
In the interests of trying to create a stable, secure government, we will go the extra mile, and we will offer to the Liberal Democrats in a coalition government the holding of a referendum on the alternative vote system.
So we're moving towards a Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition?
Well, that's a matter for my colleagues later on, when we meet later on. We're meeting again this evening. We do want to get a move on with this, and we'll try to reach a resolution, I'm sure.
But it's not full-blooded PR, is it? AV. In fact, for some ways it can be less proportional.
Well, AV is not it's no secret that our preferred system is TV. But obviously we've had an offer and we'll consider it.
Tonight, Labour held talks with the Lib Dems at the Commons, and afterwards the School Secretary Ed Balls called them positive and constructive. Labour's trying to trump the Conservatives by pledging AV without a referendum, and also a referendum on the kind of proportional voting system that the Lib Dems really prefer.
And Michael Crick joins us now from Downing Street. First of all, how has Cameron managed to keep the Conservative right on board throughout all this?
Well, that's the fascinating question. Basically, David Cameron today, in order to get into the door here in Downing Street, has had to make offers not just to the Liberal Democrats, but as I understand it, to the right of his party. There will have been MPs who have had serious misgivings about this concession on AV, the AV referendum, and also serious misgivings about any kind of coalition agreement with the Liberal Democrats. Well, as I understand it tonight, the promise is further, more Conservative cabinet posts for prominent right-wingers. And the names that I'm hearing tonight are David Davis. That must have been a difficult one for David Cameron to swallow, given Mr Davis's resignation a year or two ago. And the former leaders, Michael Howard and Ian Duncan Smith.
And in your view, could a Lib-Lab pact actually work?
Well, I'm pretty sceptical about that. A lot of people in politics are. A lot of people, frankly, in the Labour Party are. First of all, look at the figures. They don't add up. Labour has got 258 seats, the Liberal Democrats 57. Adding those together, you only reach 315. That's 8 short of the majority, the finishing line. So they'd have to bring in other parties as well. The SDLP from Northern Ireland, that wouldn't be much of a problem, but they also Plaid Cymru, maybe the SNP, 1 or 2 other MPs. It would be a very unstable coalition. And, of course, you'd only just get a majority even then. And, of course, that's assuming that all the backbenchers remain totally obedient and loyal. And we've seen what problems Gordon Brown's had with his backbenchers over the last 3 years. And, of course, come the by-election or whatever, it would run into problems. And then, of course, there's the problem of having a second unelected by the public leader, Prime Minister. And on top of that, there's huge scepticism about whether Gordon Brown or his successor can really deliver on these promises on AV and a more proportional voting system. Would the PLP be willing to agree to, the Parliamentary Labour Party be willing to agree to AV without a referendum, or even to a referendum on a system like STV? So I think it is a pretty understandable scepticism about whether this would work.
Michael, thank you very much. Well, as it happens, the Labour Deputy Leader, Harriet Harman, has just been in negotiations with the Liberal Democrats this evening. She joins us now. Do you think you've done enough tonight to get the Liberal Democrats to sign up?
Well, it's not about getting the Liberal Democrats to sign up. It's about saying, bearing in mind the public haven't voted for any one party to have an overall majority and go straight into majority government, what is the best thing in the public interest for us to do to make sure that we play our part to have a stable and secure government?
And if that means ditching your manifesto commitment to a referendum on electoral reform as an AV, you've just done it. You've just ditched it, and you've told the Liberal Democrats you'll go one better than the Tories, and you'll produce a bill.
Well, obviously, in discussions, if you're going to have a partnership arrangement rather than just delivery of your own manifesto, you have to compromise and discuss things. But I do think that this suggestion is really a Conservative scare story. The idea that somehow we've gone into negotiations and have immediately ditched the idea that there would be a referendum, and without actually wanting to disclose what's been discussed. Perhaps I could just draw people's attention back to what our manifesto said, which was that we support the idea of changing the voting system to an AV, but we think it should not happen without a referendum.
And you stand by that?
But we obviously have to discuss these things not only with the Liberal Democrats, but with also the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party and the Parliamentary Labour Party. But what we've got to do is, sooner rather than later, we need a government, a new government, to take the country forward.
Was the continuation of Gordon Brown in Downing Street a deal breaker?
Well, I think Gordon took the view that he needed to take some responsibility for the election result, that actually it would pave the way more easily to a partnership agreement if he stepped down.
And he was never going to be able to work with Nick Clegg.
I don't think that's the point. I think he felt it was in the public interest for him to step aside, and I think we should pay credit to him for doing that.
The Liberal Democrats seem to suggest it was a deal breaker.
Well, that might be their view about what they wanted to do by way of an agreement, but that's neither here nor there, because before the discussions have even started, Gordon Brown himself has said that he's stepping aside.
And it's the best thing for the party and the country, is it, that he steps aside?
Well, yes, it is, I think, and he's made that clear, and I think we should pay credit to him for that.
Will the Liberal Democrats take any Labour leader, do you think?
Well, I think that it's not a question of the Liberal Democrats choosing the Labour leader. I think Gordon Brown stood aside.
Will they take any Labour leader?
Well, you know, we haven't got into that question. The question of who is the Labour leader is for the NEC to actually set the timetable and the processes, and for the Labour Party to actually decide on that. But I think at the moment we're trying to form a government after a general election, and we haven't set the timetable for the leadership election yet.
Are you going to stand?
I'm deputy leader of the Labour Party, and I've got no plans to step aside from that role.
So that means you're not standing for leader?
No, I'm staying as deputy leader.
So you're
That's
not.
my plan.
I just want to be absolutely clear at this. You're not standing.
You can't run for leader at the same time as being deputy leader.
So there's no circumstance in which you will actually resign deputy leader in order to stand?
It's my plan to stay deputy leader.
In that case,
I think
will
that's
you be
the best
supporting
thing for stability.
David Miliband? Will you be supporting Ed Balls? Who will you support?
Well, I think to stay on as deputy it would be invidious to actually get into backing one or another candidate. But actually, at the moment, I don't think anybody is declaring themselves as a candidate, because what we need to do is make sure that we've got a new government for Britain. And actually, that's the most immediate priority.
But you must have heard John Reid say quite categorically, this is just clinging on to power at any price. And it's undignified apart from anything else.
It's not clinging on to power. Gordon Brown has actually stepped aside.
No,
and what
Labour trying to cling on to power, not Gordon Brown, clearly.
No, it's what we're saying is we're prepared to play our part, and if we can be part of a partnership government, then so be it. In the public interest, we'll do that. We recognise that we didn't win the election. That is self-evident, that's obvious. But we need to play our part as parliamentarians to form a new government.
Now, one of the key economic planks of the Liberal Democrat offer at the election was no tax for those, no income tax for those earning less than £10,000. Do you rule that out as a possible offer?
Well, we've already, over the years, increased the threshold at which you start paying tax. And obviously, these sorts of issues will have to be discussed.
But that is a key policy. I'm asking you, because I'm going on to do another interview in a second, I'm asking you, do you rule out no income tax for under £10,000 a year?
Well, obviously, you don't go into discussions ruling in or ruling out anything. I've said it's not a matter of principle. We obviously want to help people on lower income, and we've, over the years ourselves, lightened the burden of tax on those on lower income by raising the tax threshold.
Harriet Harman, thank you very much indeed. Now I can be joined from Westminster by Michael Gove, who is part of the other negotiating team. You've been listening carefully. You're not part of the negotiating team, you're close to the negotiating team, I should say. If there's a referendum on AV, just if there is a deal done between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, and there's a referendum on AV, which way would you campaign? For AV or against it?
Well, at the moment we know there's a free vote. My own preference is to stick with the first-past-the-post system, but I think the most important thing is that you maintain a constituency link, and the alternative vote does that. Now,
we know that you're very close to David Cameron. Does that mean the leadership of the party would would campaign against AV as well?
It would be a free vote across the parliamentary party. Each individual would decide how they might vote if there were a referendum. And I think there's a critical distinction here between the position that we're offering and the position that I think the Labour Party and Harriet Harman are offering. We believe if there is going to be a change to the voting system, that the British people need to decide. And the Labour Party are preparing to change the voting system without the British people deciding. More than that, they're also attempting to arrange a coronation of a new Prime Minister without the British people having had a chance to scrutinise any of the candidates.
So basically, you are considering entering a coalition with a party with whom you fundamentally disagree over electoral reform, the key plank of their election manifesto.
Well, it wasn't the key plank of their election manifesto. Before the general election, the Liberal Democrats understandably pointed out that there were a range of things which they wanted to secure. They wanted fair taxes, and we're making progress towards an agreement between ourselves and them on the arguments that they made for a fair taxation system. They also wanted reforms to education, where we broadly agree and where we're working towards consensus. And it was clear before the election that the Liberal Democrats said that, of course, while they quite rightly have always wanted to change the voting system, that's part of their DNA, they also wanted to stress that was just one of a range of options. On
the question of fair taxes, I understand tonight that you have given way on no income tax for incomes of less than £10,000. Is that correct?
We've moved towards the Liberal Democrat position on that, and they have moved towards our position on the need to deal with the deficit more quickly. It's in the nature of these negotiations.
So that is that would take £17 billion to pay for that tax break. Are you going to scrap Trident? What are you going to do? It's £17 billion.
No, we're not going to scrap Trident.
Obviously.
You were kind enough at the beginning.
Are you going to pay for it?
You were kind enough at the beginning, Kirsty, to acknowledge that I'm not part of the negotiating team. And we're in a new political realm here. And in that new politics, where we have two parties that are seeking to provide stable government, ourselves and the Liberal Democrats, then a negotiation goes on. Because
but
you're quite
let's
right.
be quite clear. You don't. I mean, I accept you're not part of the negotiating team, but you know
Indeed.
fine well the impact of scrapping income tax for less than £10,000 means £17 billion to find. Have you any idea how you're going to find that £17 billion?
And you know fine well, Kirsty, that you don't reveal your entire negotiating hand on television, even to someone who asks questions as seductively as you do.
OK, here we go. Here's what David Cameron said during the election campaign. How do you pay for it? It's £17 billion. We have an enormous deficit. We need to reduce the deficit. You can't go around making promises like that. He's just caved in on this one.
No, he hasn't caved in. You were deploying the sort of vocabulary that you would expect from a macho era in politics. Let's be clear. The electorate did not give any party a majority. I dearly wish they had. And of course, every party wishes that they had more than 326 MPs and they could implement all of their manifesto. We're now in negotiations with the Liberal Democrats and we respect their priorities and they've respected some of ours. I hope that we can provide what the country needs at this point, which is a stable and broad-based government. If the Liberal Democrats choose, and it is their prerogative, to go into an arrangement with Labour, then as John Reid has pointed out, as David Blunkett has pointed out, it is an unstable arrangement. If they choose to go in with Labour, as we all know, we don't know who the Prime Minister at the end of that process would be. We do know that Nick Clegg, Gordon Brown and David Cameron all went through television debates. The public had a chance to scrutinise their positions. We do know that under Labour's proposals, we could end up with someone as Prime Minister whom nobody expected to be in that position and nobody scrutinised.
You were generous enough yesterday or the day before to say that you would give up your cabinet post in favour of a Liberal Democrat. Do you feel as generous about the idea that David Cameron apparently is going to bring in right-wingers? He's going to bring in Michael Howard, Ian Duncan Smith and also David Davis to a cabinet. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's up to David, who's in his team. And it's a team effort in the Conservative Party. One of the striking things, I think, has been that David has made this open and very generous offer to the Liberal Democrats. And in so doing, he secured the support of the entire Parliamentary Conservative Party. And there's a difference there, I think, between our party being united and being ready to work with the Liberal Democrats on an agreed basis, and some of the tensions that we're seeing in the Labour Party with folk like John Reid out there saying that this is an historic mistake that Labour are making.
With that, I'm afraid I'll have to stop you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, we had hoped to speak to a Liberal Democrat representative in the programme, but as they are currently meeting to discuss the offers put to them, no one was available. The deal-making and horse trading going on just now is the flip side of the slickly managed TV debates of the campaign. This is politics in the raw, and a Labour leadership election will only intensify this febrile atmosphere. But could this blow the Labour Party wide apart? And if so, who'd be left to pick up the pieces? David Grossman reports.
So that's clear then. We don't know how we're going to get our next PM and we don't know who it's going to be. On the Labour side, everything has been thrown wide open. The calculation that was made inside Downing Street this afternoon is perhaps the most nakedly political that it's possible to imagine. The Labour Party decided Gordon Brown was going to have to go whatever happened. But making him or getting him to announce his departure this afternoon, well, there was just a chance that the party could cling on to power.
I think the statement was the measure of the man. He reached a judgment after the election that the right course was for him to stand down before the coming Labour Party conference, and so he made clear his intentions to the British people today. He also made clear that Nick Clegg has requested formal negotiations with the Labour Party. Where those negotiations reach, we cannot yet be clear, but in the meantime we will continue to discharge our responsibilities as the government of the country while engaging in those discussions with the Liberal Democrats.
The big question, though, is did the Liberal Democrats make Gordon Brown's departure a precondition of any negotiations?
All I can tell you from what I know of the discussions that have gone on is that at no point were the Liberal Democrats saying, look, you know, we might talk to you, but it's all dependent on Gordon Brown going. And I think they know that is not their place to do that. And the Labour Party will decide who its leader should be. And Gordon Brown has taken a decision today, which he set out. And I think he's made sense of a situation that is a bit clearer than it was.
But make no mistake, this throw of the dice by the Prime Minister on behalf of his party is deeply controversial even within the Labour Party, with senior figures voicing dire warnings.
I think that from the point of view of the electorate, the two losing parties trying to usurp the role of the major party, though I disagree with that party, will not be welcomed. I think that from the point of view of cobbling together the necessary numbers, to rely on the Scottish Nationalists and the Northern Irish, as we would have to, their demand will be that the English get all the cuts, that they are protected from the cuts. So in all sorts of ways, from the country's point of view, I think it will be pretty disastrous. From the point of view of the Labour Party, I think that if we look as though we are cocking a snoop at the electorate, I think the electorate will wreak their revenge on the Labour Party, and that's my particular interest in the future of this party.
In truth, the battle to replace Gordon Brown as Labour leader has been simmering just below the surface for at least the last 2 years. If this deal with the Liberal Democrats can be pulled off, can be made to work, well, the person who occupies number 10 long term will be chosen not by the British people, but by the Labour Party. Again.
There are lots and lots of names in the frame, and they won't all run. People expect David Miliband to run, they expect Ed Balls to run, but there are other candidates. For example, David Miliband's brother, Ed Miliband, Ed Balls' wife, Yvette Cooper, who could run as well. I'm not sure if they can all challenge each other. John Cruddas, Harriet Harman, any number of people could run.
Tonight, Labour's deputy leader, Harriet Harman, though, has ruled herself out of the race. But everyone else, including the front-runner David Miliband, is presumably still in.
Well, we agreed as a cabinet that no potential candidates would launch their campaigns or put forward their names until the vital business of securing a government for this country that can command a majority in the House of Commons is completed. Once that is completed, then the Labour Party can get on with its business of electing a new leader.
But hang on, remember those debates that everyone made such a fuss about? It seems that our next Prime Minister could be someone who wasn't even there.
We will know who the Prime Minister is until a new leader of the Labour Party is elected, and there will be a proper democratic process inside the Labour Party to choose the new leader.
But not involving the British people?
There will be a proper democratic process inside the Labour Party. It's quite common in our system to have the leaders of parties and indeed, from time to time, the Prime Minister changing during the course of a Parliament. We are a parliamentary democracy, and it's the support and confidence of Parliament which rightly determines who governs.
Who is the big question? This afternoon over Downing Street, there was white smoke coming out of the chimney. The politics of picking a pope looks simple compared to this.
David Grossman, well, to discuss the wisdom or otherwise of deals the Liberal Democrats and the leadership of the Labour Party, I'm joined by the former Conservative Cabinet Minister John Redwood, and for Labour from Glasgow, Tom Harris. Tom Harris, first of all, you stood for Parliament in order to get power. Would a Labour-Lib Dem deal under any incumbent Labour leader be good for the country?
Well, that remains to be seen. I have very serious doubts, and I've spoken to a lot of colleagues this evening who have expressed very similar doubts, and I think we have to tread very carefully here, and I think that John Reid's comments earlier this evening, we really should pay very close attention to them.
What are the basis of your doubts?
Well, first of all, I mean, there's clearly no way that kind of coalition, if it is a coalition, could be remotely stable. I and many of my Scottish colleagues, for instance, will never simply not sit next to Scottish nationalists that we've been trying to defeat over the past 4 weeks. Not even
for the good of the country? You wouldn't stay with the Nats then?
I don't think it would be necessarily for the good of the country to have such an unstable coalition. And I think what John Reid said was really important. I mean, it's not my job to concede defeat on behalf of my party. That's for other people to do that if they feel that's appropriate. But, you know, we got 29% of the vote. We lost nearly 100 seats. For the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, who also suffered a setback, to form a coalition along with everybody else. I just think a lot of people will be looking at that and scratching their heads and wondering why we went to the polls in the first place.
Well, I'm going to talk to you about some of the details of that in a minute, but let's turn to John Redwood. Are you happy with the latest concessions the Conservatives seem to be making to the Liberal Democrats in order to try and cobble together a deal?
Well, I think it shows that the Conservative leadership has gone the extra mile to try and get an agreement, and I think that shows that we're putting the national interest above our party preoccupations.
But you'd be happy with AV? I mean, that would be a good move as far as you're concerned. That's
I do not support the system of AV, no. I like the current system we've got. I think it's the least bad system, and it's the one which has the merit that everybody understands it. But I quite understand why we need to offer a referendum on the issue. It will be up to the British people. It would be quite wrong to shove a new system of voting on the British people after this election without a referendum.
Well, let's just turn and ask Tom Harris about that, because what it seems to be the case now, you heard Harriet Harman saying there that not necessarily a referendum, in fact, no referendum, straight to a bill on AV.
Actually, Kirsty, what Harriet actually said was that the rumours that we were going to offer a straight to a bill without a referendum were spun by the Conservatives and was not actually what the Labour Party was offering. But let me be absolutely clear. In a manifesto, we were committed, I think unwisely, to a referendum on AV. That is the very maximum we can offer the Liberals in any dodgy deal that we want to put together.
Would a bill on AV get through Westminster, do you think, Tom Harris?
I'll certainly vote against any bill that goes any further than what was committed in our manifesto, and an awful lot of my colleagues feel exactly the same way, so I would very much doubt that.
A couple of other issues. First of all, the story tonight that David Cameron's preparing to bring Michael Howard, Ian Duncan-Smith and David Davis into a cabinet. A good move or a bad move?
Well, I'm not sure how strong that story is, but David Cameron must choose his cabinet once he's in the business of forming a government. I think, first of all, we need to sort out whether we're going to be forming a government with the Lib Dems or not.
But would you be prepared to be in a cabinet?
Well, I'd be very happy to talk to David about that, but I haven't been asked to talk about it.
Well, let's talk about this key tax thing, because, no income tax for incomes of less than 10,000, £17 billion. And during the campaign, David Cameron was absolutely clear. He thought this was wrong. So can you play roulette with the economy simply to get power?
Well, I don't think they've agreed to say we can suddenly cut 17 billion out of the revenues with nothing else happening in the first year of a Conservative Liberal government. I'm a tax cutter. I was the one who kept the flame of tax cutting alive when it wasn't popular with any of the three major parties, so I'm delighted if people want to cut income tax for people, but I also want to know how it's going to be paid for. And that's where I think there needs to be more negotiation over whether it can be done out of spending cuts or whether there are other tax increases, and if so, what would they be?
Tom Harris, when you, and also this to John Redwood as well, when you think of how the electorate is viewing all this horse trading offers, up in the offers, isn't there a danger that it looks as if leaders, or potential leaders, are becoming too corrupted with the sniff of power?
Well, where do we start with how bad this looks to the electorate? And what I've been saying for a while is that what we have is exactly what we would get after every general election if we actually had elections under PR. Where the parties put up the manifestos, and then as soon as the voters have their say, you go behind closed doors, you have secret meetings, you barter away all the manifesto promises that you just fought the election on. It is the very opposite of democratic and transparent.
And John Redwood, you entirely in agreement about that with Tom Harris?
Yes, I agree that it shows what a disaster it is if you have hung parliaments all the time and you have to have all this horse trading and people don't get what they thought they were voting for. It's a very bad system.
Thank you both very much. Well, the day began, and it seemed a very long time ago, the day began with the news that the EU and the IMF have put together a $1 trillion global emergency rescue package to stop contagion from Greece's meltdown infecting the Eurozone. We have closed ranks to save the euro, said the French Finance Minister, Christine Lagarde. Well, I'll be speaking to her in a moment. But first, I'm joined by our economics editor, Paul Mason, to take us through what's been happening today and the impact of the uncertainties of government and obviously the news of the resignation. How is that going to impact on the market?
When Gordon Brown made his statement, sterling slid a bit, 1 cent against the dollar, not much, and the bond market barely moved. Now, what they've seen since, I think, will not impress the markets. In fact, people in those markets are expecting them to go a little bit negative tomorrow, perhaps more than a little bit. The reason, they don't like political instability and political lack of credibility and lack of resolve. Also, people who don't like that are credit rating agencies. They moved on the strength of one cabinet meeting against Greece. They've been waiting to see what comes out of this. Now, what don't they like specifically? They don't like the arithmetic of the Lib lab coalition. As you just heard there, it doesn't add up to a government. Who's Caroline Lucas, they may be asking tomorrow morning. The next thing they don't like is to see centre-right parties throwing, seemingly at will, long-cherished principles out the window in a single night. So it's not just an anti-Labour thing, although I think the bigger concern is the lack of arithmetic there. But we are braced, actually, tomorrow, and I don't often say the markets won't like this, but I think tomorrow they probably won't.
Well, let's look now at this massive, massive amount of money.
In other news, the world is saved.
Well, but is the Eurozone saved? I mean, is this going to do the business?
Let's just have a look at the deal. We've got the details here. 60 billion cash up front to try and stop Portugal, Spain and Ireland, if they want it, from going the way of Greece. That's real money on the table. Much bigger sum committed by EU governments, Eurozone governments, 440 billion euros in terms of being able to staunch the whole system. 250 billion from the IMF. Now, that's important because it's another Rubicon crossed. This may have some relevance if we don't get a government that can get its finances under control here. But the biggest thing they've done, really, is to change the policy of the European Central Bank to effectively go into the market, buy bonds, and thereby pump what we call liquidity, money into the system. And we'll hear from an expert now why that is so important.
The ECB has orchestrated buying of government bonds. One national central bank was buying the government bonds of other central banks, for example, across the Eurozone. This is akin to the UK's quantitative easing. And what this did today was absolutely collapse the level and the cost of borrowing for countries like Greece. Greece would have been effectively paying nearer to 12% for 10 years earlier today, but now the cost would effectively be 6%.
But the cost of that achievement, of getting things right with the euro, make no mistake about it, is for North Europe to impose conditions on South Europe, and the conditions are that there will effectively be fiscal government in Europe. We're on a stride towards a real economic government in the Eurozone.
Paul, thank you. Well, earlier I spoke to the French Finance Minister, Christine Lagarde. I started by asking her what her reaction was to Gordon Brown's announcement today.
Well, there's clearly a lot of excitement, a lot happening, and it's a clear change of the guard. Now, you would expect me to say something like that, wouldn't you?
Yes, but which do you prefer? Do you prefer a coalition between Conservatives and Liberal Democrats, or a coalition between Labour, Liberal Democrats and others?
It's not for me to prefer one or the other. It's for them to sort out what is best for the British people.
Is there not a danger, though, if there's a vacuum as these negotiations are going on, of instability? And at this very moment, instability is presumably the last thing we all want.
The action we took last night and over the weekend, actually, following from the Eurogroup Head of States summit, was clearly intended to restore stability and to avoid instability in the financial markets. And I think that has brought about a significant rally today, and it's certainly better for the economy to have stability than to have instability. I don't know whether that translates into political balance, equilibrium, and the whole picture, but stability is better.
Alistair Darling seemed to indicate that the United Kingdom's exposure is around $8 billion. Does that accord with your view?
It's for Alistair to, provide the appropriate level of data, but it's a matter that we vastly addressed and tried to sort out from a Eurogroup perspective, and that was clearly indicated by Alistair at the very beginning of the virtually 11 or 12 hours meeting we had last night. It's for the Euros to sort out the Euro, not for us. Thank you very much.
And do you think we're heading towards a fiscal government of Europe?
Together with the financial package, which I would not call a bailout, because a bailout is intended for something that is falling apart, and this is not the case for the Eurogroup. But apart from that package, we have two other aspects to it. One is what I call the fiscal consolidation, in other words, the determination by all 16 members of the Eurozone to restore public finance, to cut the deficit, to reduce indebtedness, and to do that in a consistent and converging manner so that we can maintain that stability. And the second chapter had to do with accelerating the financial regulation, which has to come about and has to bring predictability, stability, and a bit more equity on those markets.
But we may be in a situation that this is not the last crisis, but are we seeing now the possibility that the IMF will step in and bail out other EU countries?
The ECOFIN, the G7, the G20, the European Central Bank and the International Monetary Fund, all of them saying collectively, we want stability, we want the euro to be solid and stable, enough of that. And there was a clear response from the markets. Now, is that to say that the IMF is going to step in each and every fortnight? No. But the IMF is saying, I'm on board, I will be able to support if need be, and I will top up any European financing from the European Stabilization Fund by 50%. That's another significant message.
Thank you very much, Christine Lagarde.
Pleasure.
And how did the markets react to that EU action? The FTSE 100 share index surged more than 200 points. In New York, the Dow Jones closed more than 400 points. Against the euro, the pound was slightly up. Against the dollar, the pound was up rather more. Gordon Brown said the election was a judgment on him, but there are many who made their judgment on his record as Prime Minister a long time ago. Gordon Brown's political ambition stretched back to his teenage years, driven, he said, by the social injustice he witnessed accompanying his father, a Church of Scotland minister, on parish visits. But his reputation as bad-tempered and thrawn, or contrary, was only reinforced by his behaviour. I'm joined now by Andrew Rawnsley of The Observer and Steve Richards of The Independent. First of all, Andrew Rawnsley, will Gordon Brown go down as one of the tragic figures of the early 21st century?
Well, there was a tragedy which actually he himself anticipated. There's been this pattern of British political history of very dominant prime ministers, then being followed by fag-end prime ministers. And he always worried that he would be like that, as Rosebery was to Gladstone, say, or Chamberlain was to Baldwin. So that he won't be entirely tragic, and some people will say it's self-inflicted tragedy, but if there's tragedy, that's part of it, that he joins that sad category of prime ministers who's never won an election in their own right.
Is he the architect of his own misfortune?
Partly, but I disagree with Andrew about the tragedy thing. See, if you look back at his career, he's been at the top of British politics. I mean, he only had a short time as Prime Minister, and we all know about that. But when he became Shadow Chancellor in 1992, he's really been in the heat at the very top of British politics ever since. That is an epic amount of time. And he was 11 years as Chancellor. Most Labour Chancellors, haven't been many of them, don't survive very long. Most leaders in waiting don't become leaders. He was a Chancellor for 11 years who then became a leader. So it's an epic career, and there is tragedy in it, famously, but it's much more complex than that.
I agree with you, and I wouldn't disagree with that. On the one hand, as Prime Minister, he led his party to its second worst defeat since 1918. But to be fair, in partnership with Tony Blair, they together took a party that had lost 4 elections in a row and turned it into one that won 3 full terms. Absolutely unprecedented in Labour history. So taking his career as a round, obviously has to have credit for that. He will be seen as a uniquely powerful Chancellor, I think, and a very good Chancellor broadly, up until about 2005-06, when he started to spend too much money, leaving us with a structural deficit.
Look at what the papers say tomorrow. Brown plays the last card in The Guardian, and of course he will carry on for the next 4 months, one imagines, unless, of course, there is a Tory-Lib coalition. The Independent, the sacrifice, Brown steps down to enable a deal with the Liberal Democrats. Brown to quit and bid to win over Liberal Democrats. I mean, the Liberal Democrats say it was a deal breaker. The Daily Mail, a squalid day for democracy, a very Labour coup. The Daily Telegraph. Well, of course, you know, he was very good at that kind of manoeuvring, wasn't he?
Well, it was very interesting. One of his aides said to me at the weekend, who'd been through about 10,000 crises with Brown, he always has some kind of ace to play during the crisis. It not always works, but he always has a card play. But I wonder what there is this time. Well, it turned out to be his own resignation. Very cleverly timed. And if it comes off, still a huge if, it would be quite a remarkable resignation that becomes a game changer in quite a profound way.
And of course, in the midst of that announcement he was going to resign, he dropped the line, formal negotiations are taking place with the Lib Dems.
Yes, he did, and of course if he pulls it off, he'd also bought himself to September, so he'd at least clock up 3 years on the scoreboard, so his premiership would look a bit better. I think, looking at the premiership part of it, with the exception of the financial crisis, where I'm one of those who gives him a lot of credit, he did lead the world in recapitalisation, taking a big gamble with that when the Americans and the Europeans weren't ready to do it. But the part of the tragedy of his premiership, and a surprise to many of his friends, that he never seemed to find an overarching narrative for it, a purpose for it, and as a result, he couldn't renew Labour sufficiently.
Yes, because he'd wanted it for too long, hadn't he? And he was only forced into the style of cabinet government when things went badly wrong for him.
Yeah, he had quite an awkward inheritance, actually, which would need 10 hours to look at, not 30 seconds.
I'm sure there'll be 10 hours soon.
But he never, I think, fully found his public prime ministerial voice. There were obviously the famous behind-the-scenes tensions that Andrew has chronicled in his latest book. And, of course, he faced a whole range of crises, not entirely brought on by himself, including the economic one, actually. Parliamentary expenses, a whole range of things. And also, of course, it was at the end of a government which had been around for a heck of a long time. People had ambition spent and therefore could be more troublesome. It was a difficult time to get it, I think.
Having said that, if there had been another leader in place going into this election, would we be in any other position than a hung parliament, given the legacy of, Iraq, Afghanistan, the economy, expenses scandal?
It's true. I think the Labour Party may rue that at the very least it didn't have a leadership contest in 2006-07, which at least I expect he would have won it, but he wouldn't have had this unelected Prime Minister hung around his neck quite so negatively as he did. I mean, another thing which Gordon Brown and other colleagues are responsible for, I mean, he had 3 years, he could have been quicker on constitutional reform, he could have tried to introduce AV already, and Labour might be in a much better position to do a coalition if they had done.
OK, just before we go, a quick word from both of you. Who will be the next leader of the Labour Party?
But let's see who throws their hats into the ring first.
It looks as if it will be David Miliband, Ed Balls, possibly a couple of others, including David's brother might be in there as well. But it's very early on. I don't think it's going to be resolved for quite some time yet, whatever happens.
Thank you both very much. Well, that's all from Newsnight tonight. Do join us for Deal or No Deal tomorrow night. Same time, same place. Good night.